Welcome back. This is the last part in my Stephen King book collection, kind of quick show and talk and whatever. We're on the last show, so without further ado, let's just get into it. If you haven't seen the last two parts, go watch those. They'll help this video make more sense. But starting with those, we're on writing. This is a book about writing. It's on writing, it's about writing. If you want to become a better writer, if you want to learn a bit about writing, I'd recommend this book. It's a good book for that, specifically. If you're just interested in reading something that Stephen King made himself, like a story like Firestarter, we've been talking about all these stories that, are like fiction, fantasy, realistic fiction. This isn't that. This is nonfiction. This is just him almost like trying to teach you, trying to help you become a better writer. It's really good at that, so I'd highly recommend this for that reason. Next up is The Outsider. This is one of his newer novels. It's really good. It's a kind of side story to the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. Some people call it the Bill Hodges trilogy because that's the main character in those, but he's not in this. The thing is, that's why it's a side story. It's not like a direct sequel. It's like a side story. Some of the characters in that series appear in this. But I read this first, so I kind of got spoiled for the Mercedes series trilogy. So, well, read the trilogy first before reading this. But then again, this is still a good book on its own. It's got a crime with an impossible alibi and an impossible evidence. Like, they have evidence towards one guy, but that one guy has a perfect alibi. They find evidence to both convict him and to say he's innocent. And it's like seal-proof, like evidence. How is that possible? And this book kind of answers that. Next up, Pet Cemetery. Oh, I don't know what that was, but anyhow, this is an interesting book. I finished it in like that. I just read it, and it's so good. Stephen King says that this was the one he was most worried to make. He believes he at one point thought this was his darkest novel, which I don't agree with, but he was worried because a kid dies. But like kids die in it, so I don't really. Anyhow, it's kind of a more focused death, and it's very traumatic. I'm sorry if that spoiled it for you. I should have not said that. I'm so sorry. But yeah, he was really worried about it being a bit traumatic. And Stephen King does a really good job in this book building up, just the sadness that a person can feel. And I've seen the movie, the original, and the remake, and they're okay, but the book's just way better. There's just more story, there's more plot, there's so much more to it, and I'd highly recommend it. Sorry if that little minor spoiler kind of like got you mad, though it's been years. It's not that big of a spoiler. The main plot of the story kind of goes all after that, so whatever. Anyhow. Next up is The Regulators. This is the book that connects to Desperation. It's by Richard Bachman, which means it's good. I'm dead serious. It's like literally like Rage is maybe the one that's not good. All the other ones I had a wonderful time reading. And this is an absolute bloodbath. It starts off very calm, and then it gets super exciting, and it just keeps going crazier and crazier until the very end. And it's amazing. Read it. Read it. Read Desperation. Love them both. They're amazing. Revival. Ooh, I haven't read this. It's newer. I think it was made in like 2014. I've heard it's good. I've heard it has like something about a theme of like getting older, but I don't know. I haven't read it. Apparently it's good though. Anyhow, next up, Roadwork. This is another Richard Bachman book, which means it's good. It's about a guy getting screwed over by the government, basically. Very basically, this guy loses everything. And most of it's his own fault. If he just, let go a little bit, and just, let change happen, it's like, yeah, you got screwed over. Yeah, these things mean a lot to you. But if he just, accepted it, let it go, and moved on with his life, he would have had a happy life. But he didn't. He wanted to make a stance to show the world what had happened to him and make a point that he was being screwed over, and he lost everything because of it. Really, really good book, though. Next up, Rose Matter. Haven't finished this one. I'm in the middle of reading it. So far, really good. I'm close to finishing it. It's really interesting. A woman who's been abused by her husband for years finally just gets to a mental state. I mean, it's kind of like a stark change in herself, actually, where she eventually is able to escape, to leave, to survive. And the way that he builds this up to set things up is really good. You know, most people would think you'd leave because you're worried that he's going to kill you. She left because she thought, what if he doesn't kill you? What if it just goes on forever? And it's so good at that. It's so good at making you really think. And the husband who's awful, the abuser, is actually a cop, which means that he has the resources and, you know, skill set necessary to actually find her. And he's on the hunt for her to, I don't know, kill her. He's a psychopath. He's absolutely insane. It's a really gripping tale. There's also a magic painting, just to add stuff to it. But it's really good. You know, she's the main thing is like she's like starting over her life. It's just so good. I'd recommend it. And then next up is The Running Man, Richard Bachman. Yes. There's a movie about this. It's got Arnold Schwarzenegger as the main character, but it doesn't follow the story very much. It kind of just does its own thing. This deserves a remake, a more serious remake. I mean, I know everyone loves the movie, and it's a good. I'm sure it's a good movie. I haven't seen it, but I'd say that there should be a remake that follows the book more closely, because there's serious parts in this that can really grip you. I mean, this man is going into a huge challenge for TV. I mean, he's risking his life for television's sake, almost like the Hunger Games. If you know that, just to get money to save his daughter who's dying. Very gripping. Though I can see how the ending would be controversial because, like, it's a bit... This came out way before the travesty that people would associate the ending with. So... But, you know, people, they might just get offended. Either way, it's a wonderful book, and I'd highly recommend it. Next up in the SS is Salem's Lot. This is Stephen King's second novel that he ever made, and it's got a TV miniseries after it. Even I think it's also got a remake. It's a good book. It's his second novel he ever made. It's I think I already said that. I don't know. I'm going crazy. Anyhow, this is a really, really good book. I remember staying up all night reading it. And it takes, you know, it's a vampire novel. It's a vampire novel, and, you know, what does that mean? Because vampires, you know, always have different, like, weaknesses and strengths and different adaptations. You know, like Twilight has a completely different version of vampires than, like, Dracula. This one has a more Dracula-esque vampire setting. So if you really enjoy Dracula, which I'm in the middle of reading, actually, but that's not the point, this would be a book for you. This is a really good book. It sets up the town of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's Lot, that's what Salem's Lot's for. Actually, in the last part, I talked about a book called Night Shift, which is a short story collection. The first short story is called Jerusalem's Lot, and it's like a follow-up to this book. So, that's interesting. But I found it to be a good book. The movie was long, but it was long for a reason. I mean, it did a pretty faithful adaptation. Next up is The Shining. Just about everyone knows what The Shining is. It's just as popular as it at this point. People have said that The Shining as a movie is like the best horror film in history. And that can be debated over for hours. I don't agree with that. I do think that both the book and the movie are amazing horror stories, though. But they're so different, though. This is a ghost story. Well, the movie's more about alcoholism and insanity, with very smaller elements of, like, being a ghost story. The book is better in my opinion, and I know people may disagree with that, but I read this first, then watched the movie, and I just like this more. I think there's so much more that goes along with the characters that Jack, the father, had to go through. You know, he had such a difficult time, the father, you know, being an alcoholic, trying to be a good father, and that conflict is interesting to me. I think that's so interesting. to see his struggle, just as a character. He's like my version of Datsuki in some of my mods. Of course, there's the whole insanity bit possession, but whatever you want to call it. But I think, and that doesn't happen very much towards the end of the book. This whole story is like building up tension, and it's really, really good at it. I'd highly recommend you read it. And if you haven't seen the movie, I'd read the book first and then watch the movie. If you've seen the movie, still read the book. This is a wonderful book. It's his third one, as I believe. The third book he ever made, and it's a horror classic now. You know, it has a sequel called Dr. Sleep. Stephen King didn't originally plan to make a sequel, but he has now, and it's a movie now. They've adapted it, which is really interesting because Stephen King didn't like the film adaptation to The Shining because it made so many changes. So in this book, he has a very, very important scene to help at the very beginning that helps kind of like set up the rest of the book with a character named Dick Halloran. He was a black character, and Stanley Kubrick, the director of The Shining, the film, killed Dick Halloran off. And Stephen King didn't like that. So as an almost middle finger to Stanley Kubrick, he made sure that Dick Halloran was very important to the story after the fact of The Shining, the movie. You know, the book's end. That he still had purpose. And then they made it into a movie, and I was really interested in that because I haven't seen the movie. I don't know how they handled the fact that, you know, Dick Halloran's kind of important in this story, even though he died. Either way, if you like The Shining, you'd probably like Dr. Sleep. It's about vampires who don't want to suck your blood, but would rather suck your steam. I know that sounds weird, but just read it. It'll help you understand a bit. Anyhow, next up is Shining in the Dark. This is a short story collection from different authors. Only one of them is Stephen King, and it's the first one. It's a little story that makes no sense to me. I didn't care for it. Afterwards, Stephen King actually wrote a little bit to help explain what the story was about, and I didn't get it. None of it actually made sense to me, but you know, maybe I'm just not as literacy adept as others. But if you're interested in a horror tale, then go for it. Anyhow, next is Skeleton Crew. This has The Mist in it, which was made into a movie, a really good movie, and a TV series on Spike. And I believe that TV series is also on Netflix now. Anyhow, really good short story collection. There's one called The Raft, which was made in Creepshow 2. So they made a sequel to Creepshow, which was in my first part, and they put this short story in it. There's the one about the monkey, which is really interesting. And of course, there's The Mist. It's a very classic, not classic, but infamous horror film now. Just about every horror fan knows what The Mist is. And I based my character, Dr. Ollie, not on him. Only the name has something to do. The name I didn't care for Ollie. There's a character in The Mist named Ollie. He's a very good character. He's a very enjoyable character. And he's one of my favorite characters in all of Stephen King's books. So I referenced him in my mods by naming a character Dr. Ollie. And when I made him into a big catalyst to be a very big villain and a very big part of the story, I made a hint saying that The Mist took the girls. The Mist is the name of the book. Ollie's in the book. One of the characters is named Ollie. That was what I was trying to convey with that little riddle, but no one got it. So I'm sorry for that, but that's kind of what that was. Only one person was able to figure out it was Dr. Ollie, and they didn't even do it by finding out what The Mist was. They just basically got a list of like all the characters I had, and they just started scratching them off one by one, just like narrowing it down. Kudos to that person. I think it was a person whose name on YouTube is Joseph Stalin. Next book is Sleeping Beauties. Wonderful book. When I started collecting, this had just come out. It's written by both Stephen King and his son Owen King, which this is the only book by Owen King I could find. He has another son named Joe Hill, which I have just about every book of his too on this shelf. He has two sons apparently. I don't know too much else about that. But anyhow, Owen King, he helped write this, and this book is really interesting. Basically, every woman in this town, and probably in the world, but in this town specifically, I can't remember if it was just local or not, but they kept, whenever they fell asleep, they'd be wrapped up in these cocoons, and they'd stay asleep. And if anyone woke them, they would become vicious and attack and kill whoever woke them. And that was bad. the thing about it is it's like it was a whole story about what would a world without men be like and what would a world without women be like, and it touches on that and kind of makes a statement about why we would need both. And I really like that. It's a really good book. If you ever have time to read it, I highly recommend it. Next up, The Stand. This is a good book. This is like one of the best books. I've said this is a good book about so many of these. This is a really good book. This is a great book. This is a fantastic book. It's about a super flu virus that basically kills like 99.9% of the world. And the survivors go to either one side, the good or the bad, and it's a really good book. You follow so many different characters, and they all kind of come together in the end in an amazing, and like, as it just keeps building, they'll kind of come together. It's so much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, how you have so many characters, and then they kind of come together towards the end. That's what this is, and it's so good. Read it because it's so good. They made it into a TV miniseries a long time ago, and I've seen it, and it's okay, but the book's so much better. I know they've recently remade it, but I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it really makes this, you know, has anything to really like justify. Like, I don't know if it's as good as this book, and it's probably not, because this book is amazing. Read it. So if you got homework, you got so many books to read now. I know it's a big book, but it's so good. It's so full and rich with good characters and plot. Please read it if you get the time. Storm of the Century. This is a screenplay, which means it's a movie. And then they just took the movie screenplay. It's by Stephen King. It's alright. I haven't seen the movie. Mostly because I've heard that it's not good. Probably because it's dated. Book's still pretty good though. I found it interesting. Best part is the bittersweet ending. If you're interested in Stephen King, you'll probably like this. It's nothing overly amazing. Anyhow, next up, The Talisman. Starting with our T's, we have The Talisman. This is a fantasy story. This is not really horror. I mean, it does have some horror elements, but this is a huge journey that a kid about 12 years old named Jack Sawyer goes on this huge journey from East Coast to West Coast of the United States. He makes it, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because this whole story is about his journey all the way to the other side of the country to save his mother. I believe she has cancer or some other disease, but I'm pretty sure it's cancer. Anyhow, he goes from New Hampshire to, I think, California. I don't know my states anymore. Anyhow, this is a good book. I know it's big, but it's big for a reason. A lot of stuff happens. A lot of different characters are introduced, and this kid has to basically he's not just walking through America. He's looking for a talisman, and it's fantasy because he finds a way to enter into this new world, and he explores this new world. It's really good. It's really good. Please read it because it's so amazing. It's written by a guy, Stephen King, but also by another author named Peter Straub, who I'm sure is authors wrote many more, but I haven't seen much from him. There's only one other book that I have by him, and it's one called Ghost Story, but I haven't read it. Anyhow, they made a sequel, Peter Straub and Stephen King, called Black House, so there's another book by Peter Straub. Anyhow, this is good. The little kid's all grown up, and he's got a new challenge to face, and it's really good. There's a beginning part in this book where the perspective's like from a tour guide. They kind of introduce the situation and the characters, like, and on your left, there is this. Now let us leave them and go to this new area. And when we see this happening, and I'm like, I hated it. I just wanted it to be like a story, like a movie, like a book. I am not on a tour. I am supposed to be going on an adventure. I'm supposed to be in this fantasy world, and I didn't like it. After they're done with their bullcrap on that, the rest of the book is really good though. I know that it has a bunch of really bad guys in it, and one of the minor ones actually a journalist, which this dude will just do anything for a story. It's ridiculous and frustrating. It's like, how like some stories, like will have like your big bad, but they're also like those like frustrating minor villains. This has that, and it's pretty good at it. It's good at making you hate certain characters and love different ones. And it has a wonderful bittersweet ending, a wonderful one. Next up is Thinner. This is a Richard Bachman book, the last one in the collection. A guy continuously gets thinner. He's a lawyer. He's very, very obese. And he gets cursed by a gypsy because he did a hit and run of another gypsy. So the other gypsy cursed him to forever get thinner until he just wastes away to nothing. And that's the plot. And it ends very good. It has such implications on it could either be ending really good or ending really bad. Probably a little bit of both. Not really bittersweet, but just like I remember I finished it and I just had to like sit down and just think about what in the world I just read. It's really good. It really makes you think. For a book about a guy getting thinner, it surprisingly had an ending that really I had to stop and just think for a moment. Anyhow, next up, The Tommyknockers. It's an alien book. Oh yeah. Just like Dreamcatcher? Nah, it doesn't have a chase scene. Does that make it better than Dreamcatcher? I'd say it's about the same. Mostly because the aliens in this are not as interesting as the aliens in Dreamcatcher. But at least this one doesn't bloat as much. This one, at least something's happening usually. Something really interesting is usually happening from time to time. It's not the best, but it's alright. It's alright. I had a hard time coming across like a main character because it's just like I remember it's just like it jumps across a bunch of different characters throughout a town and their stories. So it's almost like I don't know how to explain it, but if you read it, you'll understand it better. But it follows different characters in their story, and then their story almost comes to a halt, and then it starts with a new one, and it all together. It's a bit all over the place. Anyhow, it's still good. I know they made it into a TV miniseries at one point. Next up is Under the Dome. They made this into a TV show not long ago, and people did not like it. I read the book, and I love this book. It's really good. It took me a while to finish just because I procrastinated about halfway through, but once I picked it up again, I just bulleted through it because it's so good. A big dome, like a big force field just surrounds this town, and everyone's kind of trapped in, and everyone's like, what's causing this? How do we get out? What do we do? What stops it? What's happening? And it's really good. There are tons of different characters, tons of different things happening in this town. I mean, when you're cut off from the real world, the real world, corruption is everywhere. Who's going to enforce the law? What law? This is like nothing matters anymore when you're in this situation. And the corruption of just civilization is interesting on its own, but so much more happens. It is a really good book. It's probably one of the biggest books he's ever written, but it's worth the read. Seriously, go out of your way and just read it. It is so good. Man, I'm giving you guys so many books that I'm saying you have to read, but I mean, you don't have to. I'm just saying that they're really good. Anyhow, next up, the last one, 11/22/63. This is the last one in the entire collection, because numbers. That date is the date that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the president. And this book's basically about a guy who goes back in time to try to save the president. But he goes back in the past about 5 years. 5 years before the actual event, because it's not like some guy in a time machine. It's like he's found a bubble and he's walked through it, and on the other side he's in 1958. And so he has to live in 5 years in the past and meets new people, and he doesn't only just try his best to fix this issue, but the issues of others as well. He knows of other but other incidents, and he goes out of his way to help. And I really like that. It's it's a really good book. I remember it's a Hulu series now, and Brenirka and I, we watched it together, and she cried at the end. I cried at the end of the book. Or did I cry? I don't know. Maybe I'm like the beginning. The first words of this book is like the man who doesn't cry. I don't cry much because I'm a guy and you can't cry, or society. And anyhow, this is it'll pull on your heartstring at parts. It's bittersweet. It's so bittersweet at the end. It's like, this is a really good book. I didn't expect it because, I thought for a moment it was just going to be like a historical thing. I mean, I like history, but I mean, that many pages of just one event? No. That is a really good story. And I recommend any of these books to you guys. They're all good. I mean, Stephen King's a wonderful writer. He's made so many bestsellers for a reason, because he's good at writing. And reading them's just fun. And I feel like if you guys are interested in reading it all, those are some good books that you can spend your time with. Anyhow, I just thank you again so much for watching, and this is it. So if you're here for the code, the hint should always be in the description. So check that out. And that's only for people who are watching this like as it comes out. In a couple days, the code won't matter, so do your best. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you just enjoy this channel. This Brenirk and Brenirka channel is just for us to make stuff that we're just passionate about. I love these books, and I've enjoyed making these videos just because I love Stephen King. And both Brenirka and I want to make more videos. They're just different things. There's no real set like type of content we're planning on making. Just whatever we want, we post on this channel. And it's something for you guys to watch while you're waiting for the next mod or animation to come out. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And thank you for watching.